Good morning, everybody. I thought we'd start this morning where we left off yesterday with the prophetic words of Greta Thunberg that were projected on the United Nations building last Friday as we culminated a day of climate strikes around the world. Greta says that we can no longer save the world by following the rules because the rules must be changed. And we need a systems change, not just individual change. But the two can only come together. I think this is the change that we seek. This is what unites us together as a B Corp community and as a broader global movement of people using business as a force for good. We're looking for a systems change to move from an outdated and failing 20th century version of capitalism called shareholder capitalism to a 21st century evolution of capitalism called stakeholder capitalism. The 20th century capitalism was designed to benefit the few in the short term, to be exclusive and extractive. The 21st century capitalism that everybody here is bringing into existence is designed to benefit all for the long term, to be inclusive and regenerative. I'd also like to start today where we left off yesterday, which is with truth-telling. And the truth is, this transformation, this system change, is going to be extremely hard. This system has been around a long time. This is the logo of the first publicly traded company in the world. It's a Dutch company. This company was around for almost 200 years. It's called the Dutch East India Company. And the history of the corporation is the history of capitalism. And the history of capitalism over these last 400 years has been a history of the projection of power in the pursuit of profit. And this projection of power in the pursuit of profit has led to colonialism, imperialism, war, slavery, and genocide. While capitalism may have had its roots here in Europe, it may have reached its most perfected and pernicious form in my country, in America, in the United States. And if you want to understand American capitalism, you have to understand the history of slavery. Because American wealth and American economic power and the political power from which it emanates are a direct result of the enslavement of 10 million people of African descent, the expropriation of 1.5 billion acres of land, and a genocide of native peoples. That's the truth of our history and the history of this economic system that we're trying to change. When Greta says our house is on fire, she's right. It is on fire not just from the forests of the Amazon, but also to the streets of Paris. It's on fire because it was designed, the system was designed with characteristics that inevitably produce social inequity and environmental degradation. Which is why this is the dominant energy in the world today. From the streets of Hong Kong to Paris to Rio to London to the United States, people believe the system is rigged against them, that the system doesn't care about them. And they're right. The system wasn't designed to care about the many. It was designed to care about the few. But despite all of this, I find tremendous hope I find hope in the millions that are answering Greta's call to action around the world for climate. I find hope in the millions of women, people of color, people of different sexual orientation and gender identities that are not just demanding a seat at the table, but they are setting the table for the agenda for a new system which is centered on people and not profits. And I have hope because of millions of entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders like all of you who are saying they're here to build up, not to tear down the system. And their rallying cry is to fix the system. And the good news is that those cries, that action, is having a huge ripple effect around the world. There are two requirements for the system change that Greta talks about. The first is a recognition of system failure. If you don't believe the system is broken, there's no reason to change. But if all you do is believe the system is broken, but there isn't a viable alternative, you end up just being angry. And that anger is expressed in destructive ways that leave our house burning. And so there must be a viable alternative. The good news is that there is widespread recognition of system failure, at the gross inequities of the world and inequality, of the fact that we far overshot the 350 parts per million of carbon. And as a result, more than 80% of young people, the current and future business leaders and political leaders and civic leaders of our world, no longer identify as capitalists. That's a basic erosion of trust in our economic system. And that's dangerous. And people in positions of power and privilege now recognize that danger. When Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, the largest institutional investor in the world, owner of $6-point-something trillion of assets under management, wrote his first letter to CEOs where he said, titled A Sense of Purpose, and said corporations had to show, CEOs had to show and demonstrate their contribution to society, not just to their own bottom line. Andrew Ross Sorkin from the New York Times said this may be a watershed moment in the history of capitalism. That watershed moment last month became a tipping point, at least in the United States, where the Business Roundtable, a group of nearly 200 of the largest CEOs in the country, declared that there was a redefinition of the purpose of business, which was they were committing to lead for the benefit of all stakeholders. The Economist, the Financial Times, and Forbes all picked up that narrative and said we're at an inflection point. We're at a tipping point in the evolution of capitalism. We are privileged, we are fortunate to be alive at this moment of inflection. This community answered that call. It recognized this tipping point, and it said, congratulations, we're so excited, Business Roundtable, and Fortune, and FT, and The Economist. We're so glad that you are recognizing that the purpose of business is to care for all, not for the few, and to benefit all stakeholders, not just shareholders. And we said, then let's get to work making that happen. And B Corp CEOs like yourselves banded together, and he took out a full-page ad in the New York Times, inviting the Business Roundtable to join them, and inviting them to join us in helping them translate those words into action. And that call to action was picked up all around the world. And in the first 48 hours of that ad being placed, it was shared globally and reported on in all of these newspapers around the world and media outlets around the world. Over 1 billion impressions, over 1.5 million users reached, and new inquiries from large corporates around the world to join the B Corp movement, to join all of you in understanding how to put those words into action, of nearly $500 billion in revenues. You are turning that culture shift into systems change by giving people concrete actions to take to put those words into action. At the same time, our friends in Australia, in solidarity with the climate strikes, took out these ads about business. This is not business as usual, about climate and supporting the strikes. And as you heard yesterday, in December of this year, our global community is going to stand and make a declaration of climate emergency and system failure. And when we do that, we're going to ask the world to get to work on climate. And we'll see billions of more impressions and millions of more users and hundreds of millions and billions of more companies wanting to move in this direction. We should recognize some of these words. BlackRock's called about a sense of purpose, and the Business Roundtable's commitment to lead for the benefit of all stakeholders. This is the B Corporation Declaration of Interdependence, which all of you have signed, and 3,000 B Corps around the world have signed as a statement of our shared vision, which is a global economy that uses business as a force for good, which is purpose-driven and creates benefit for all stakeholders, not just shareholders. And as we link it to climate and talk about our dependency upon each other and future generations, we see where these large corporations are getting their inspiration. They're getting their inspiration from you. There's over 3,000 B Corps in nearly 70 countries and over 150 industries with one vision, which is to redefine success in business. These are just some of those examples, from large, iconic global brands like Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia, to disruptive, venture-funded unicorns like Allbirds and Culture Amp and Lemonade, with billion-dollar-plus valuations from mainstream VCs. You're proving that it is possible to create benefit for all stakeholders while creating financial value for shareholders. It's a false binary that we've been trapped in. You're proving that we can live in an and world, not an or world. And that's inspiring other multinationals to join, to acquire B Corps, Unilever, and Danone, P&G, Nestle, Coca-Cola, The Gap. All of these companies are trying to get closer to what you're doing, sometimes by creating liquidity options for you as entrepreneurs, sometimes, like Natura and L'Oreal, becoming B Corps themselves and going public or using the equity that they've built up in the public markets to acquire other companies and help them on the path, either the path back home, like Natura has done for the Body Shop, or the path forward, like Natura will do over the next years with Avon. But here's the thing. With all of this momentum that you all have created in the B Corp movement, we are headed straight for disappointment. We said this was a morning where we were going to start where we left yesterday, which is with some truth-telling. Everything that you have done is so inspiring. I've talked to so many of you over the 48 hours, and every conversation I have leaves me full and overflowing with optimism and hope and inspiration for what you're doing in your individual companies and with your cities and with your countries and with your industries. But what got us here will not get us where we want to go. We will not achieve the SDGs. We will not address the climate emergency. We will not be able to build an inclusive economy unless we address the system failure. We can no longer ask leaders to lead in a system with misaligned incentives and contrary norms. At best, that is hopeful. At worst, that is naive. We must end shareholder primacy. That is the system design flaw. That is the source code error in capitalism. And it has been there for 400 years. This system change will not be easy. We should celebrate each company, each action that is using business as a greater force for good. And we need to collectively collaborate and work together to help all of our individual businesses be more successful. But unless we address the system that we're in, we will be stunted in our growth and fall short of the mark. This is what systems change look like. We're moving from an old system to a new system. The old system said the purpose of the company was to do anything that is lawful. And the first principle of that company is to maximize profits. And the governance of that company, from a legal standpoint, the fiduciary duty of the directors of that company, their fiduciary duty of care is narrowly focused to care for shareholders, the best interests of shareholders. The management systems, therefore, that the company deploys are to manage profits. That's what everything is designed to do. And the culture in which all of that sits is a culture that values more. But we have to create a powerful new vision where the purpose of the business is to do not just what is lawful, but what is responsible and sustainable. Where the first principle is not to maximize return, but to preserve the natural and social systems on which all life and healthy markets depend. That our fiduciary duty of care as directors or as investment officers is not just to care for shareholders, but to expand the aperture of our lens, to widen the aperture of our hearts and what we care about, which is to care for the workers, the customers, the communities, and the natural world that we impact. The management systems, of course, have to manage profits because we're businesses and we're growing concerns, but they also have to manage impact. And the culture has to go from a culture of more to a culture of enough. We have to be able to recognize when we have enough. And we need not just to embrace free markets, but we need to embrace free and fair markets. So I'm often asked, where are we going to go? How are we going to get there? And I would say, in the spirit of truth-telling, we're going to have to go into the lion's den. That's what's next. That's where the road takes us next. And the lion's den are the capital markets. The capital markets are the biggest impediment to the change we seek. That doesn't make the people in finance bad people. It just means that the system in which they're playing, the rules by which they're playing, are designed, and in some ways the culture attracts people who prioritize more and faster and exclusive. That's just the math equation of return on investment. Externalize all the costs, concentrate all the earnings. That's how you get higher ROI, shorten the time horizon. Until we change the rules, we will not have different outcomes. And so this community needs the courage to go into the lion's den. The good news is that in addition to being our biggest impediment, the capital markets are also our biggest opportunity. The Lion King is not only my favorite movie, because it connects me with my father and my son and my daughter. And it makes sure I recognize where I stand in that intergenerational connection and what my responsibility is. But it reminds me of the most important thing, and this comes back to Greta's words, that we need both. We need systems change and we need individual change. The words to the young prince were, "Become who you were meant to be." Become who you were meant to be. You are the lions. You are the lions. And you're not trying to be king of the ecosystem. You're trying to be stewards of the ecosystem. There is greatness in every one of you. There is greatness in every one of us to live into that which we were meant to be. But we can't do this alone. The B Corp movement is part of a much broader movement of business as a force for good. Business as a force for good is at the center. That's what we're centering on. We're not centering on B Corps. But B Corps have an incredibly important role to play to make this movement meaningful and lasting. They give it rigor and credibility, and they push it further by truth-telling, by making commitments and then taking the actions to back them up. We're not going to get where we want to go alone. We have to do this with others in a much more collaborative way than we've ever done. Not just collaboration between B Corps like we heard on the panel before. That is necessary, but it's insufficient. But it's also connecting with other networks, other business networks around the world. And I wanted to let you know about an emergent coalition between the global B Corp community and the B team and conscious capitalism and just capital, Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, CECP, and the Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism. Those are the 6 founding coalition partners for Imperative 21, who have come together with the ambitious vision that the ambition is to change the system. This would not have been possible even 12 or 24 months ago. Culture is shifting. Collaboration is happening because we're not going to be able to shift the incentives, to realign the incentives in the capital markets or to shift culture by doing it alone. And so I'm asked, where are we going to go? What is next? And as I said at dinner last night, the answer is I don't know. And sometimes I feel like a failure for not knowing when people ask me, where are we going to go from here? What's next? And I feel incredibly inadequate. But then I realized it's actually quite liberating to be able to admit that you don't know. And so I'm feeling much more liberated today in standing before you and saying, I don't know where we're supposed to go. These are the words of one of my new favorite poets, Antonio Machado, a Spanish poet. Caminante no hay camino, se hace el camino al andar hace el camino. Fellow traveler, fellow pilgrim, there is no path. We make the path by walking. By walking, we make the path. This is it. We have to walk the path together. And by walking the path, we will find the way. And it will start with each of us walking. But it is much more fun if we walk together. And so I invite you path to find out what's next so we can go into the lion's den and we can shift the incentives and we can build a market economy that is designed with people at the center, not profit at the center, to create an inclusive and regenerative economy that creates a shared and durable prosperity. I invite you to join us and let's go. Let's get to work. Thank you.